Ei gute wie, es ist das Jahr des Shadow, es kommt am Ende des Jahres der 3. Sonic-Kinofilm und wir schauen mal gemeinsam, Freunde, hier von Chaomix, The Complete Project Shadow Lore, also die ganze Geschichte um Schatten, den Igel, und zwar, ja, die ganze Geschichte von vorne bis hinten und das auf Englisch. Tut mir leid. Soll ich deutsche Untertitel versuchen? Ihr könnt ja trotzdem auf Englisch hören. Und ihr habt ja mich dabei, ne? Also, googeln wir mal.
Project Shadow. Possibly the darkest narrative of the entire Sonic series. With a storyline spanning across multiple games, it's a piece of lore that always seems to come back to play a role in one way or another, with an impact sometimes felt to this very day. It involves government conspiracies, assassinations, biological experiments gone wrong, and even aliens. And it all stems from a scientist attempting to play God. Welcome to Chaomix, and today we'll be uncovering the complete lore of Project Shadow.
Ah, wirklich Chaomix von den Schau abgeleitet. Ja, wunderbar. Erwarte ich von einem Sonic-YouTuber auch. Okay, der wird wohl nichts auslassen. Mal sehen. Ich kenn die Lore, ne? Auch aus dem Shadow-Spiel. Das mag ich nicht spielen, aber ich kenne die komplette Story.
This video is made possible by today's sponsor, 1v1.lol, the amazing hyper battle royale. Choose your champion, each with unique abilities, and select your weapon, all of which you can upgrade and even deck out with some awesome skins. And here's the best part, it doesn't matter if you're a newbie or a pro. The game adjusts to your skill level, making it the perfect playground for every player to build and destroy to their heart's content. And if you're someone who loves variety, the game keeps things fresh with many exciting modes, challenges, and events that change daily.
What's
cool about 1v1.lol is that you can jump into the action anytime, anywhere. Whether you're on a mobile device or prefer playing on PC or Steam, just download the game for free and start playing right away. And from now until May 15th, you can unlock exclusive skins of some of the biggest YouTubers for free. We're talking about Unspeakable, FaZe Rug, and even Gugge, who has a cool pickaxe skin. All you need to do is play the game, gather the necessary items, and you'll unlock these limited skins just like that. Because remember, these skins are available for a limited time only, so don't miss your chance to show off these awesome looks in-game. Make sure to download 1v1.lol and start playing to unlock these exclusive skins before they're gone. Check out the link in the description to get started. Huge thank you to 1v1.lol.
Mein Darmstadt 98 Maßstab, der geht keine 2 Meter. Der geht 1898 Zentimeter lang. Aber man sieht es nicht gut, ne? Nach 188 Zentimeter kommt 1898 Zentimeter. Geil, wa?
For sponsoring today's video, and with all that being said, let's continue with today's episode.
Continue, sagt er.
Over 50 years before the events of Sonic Adventure 2, we have Gerald Robotnik, renowned scientist and grandfather to none other than our very own Dr. Eggman. This scientific genius seems to run in the family, but in complete contrast to his grandson, Gerald is devoted to using science to make the world a better place. One of his greatest accomplishments being the Space Colony Ark, the world's first satellite colony allowing people to live in space. The Ark is an incredibly advanced research center created by Gerald for the purpose of allowing great scientists, such as himself, to conduct research and perform experiments for the greater good of mankind. Gerald has a very close bond to his beloved granddaughter, Maria Robotnik. After all, she lives on the Ark with him as she has an incurable and terminal illness called Neuroimmune Deficiency Syndrome.
Nitz. Gibt's das wirklich? Ich meine, ich weiß es nicht mehr. Nitz. Network Intrusion Detection System. Neuroimmun? Oder hat das jetzt nur mit Shadow zu tun? Oh, das gibt's wirklich. Ne, hier ist Sonic Wiki. Hä? Das gibt's wirklich? Auf jeden Fall will der Gerald Robotnik was für seine Tochter tun und alles, was da hilft, ist Alienblut.
and allegedly the lower gravity would help keep her condition in remission. But this wasn't enough for Gerald. He devoted himself to finding the cure for his granddaughter's disease.
Was niedrige Schwerkraft hilft. Ich dachte, die soll von anderen Menschen abgeschottet sein, als wäre es ansteckend.
Through science. During this time, Gerald received a request from the president of the United Federation, the Sonic Universe's equivalent of the United States, a research program called Project Shadow. It would be dedicated to developing the formula for immortality. Initially, Gerald refused, as he felt that he would be playing God and that it could possibly be used as some sort of biological weapon for war by GUN, or the Guardian Units of Nations, which was essentially the United Federation's military. Anyways, it was all morally gray areas Gerald didn't want to step foot in, but he soon realized that something like this could lead to a medical breakthrough, the perfect solution for curing Maria of her illness. So, he obliged. Such a task seemed impossible at first, but despite the pessimism from his colleagues, Gerald Robotnik spent a great amount of time researching this formula for immortality. However, where do you even begin? Luckily for Gerald, there just so happened to be a set of 7 mystical gems capable of granting miracles.
Enkelin ist krank, einfach mal Unsterblichkeit erforschen. Das wäre die Lösung.
And unlimited power. We all know them, the Chaos Emeralds. If Gerald could only just replicate their powers, surely he could convert their energy into a means of granting immortality, right? So Gerald began experimenting with ways of replicating the Chaos Emerald's energy and created the Chaos Drives. But the Chaos Drives needed to be created in such a way that living beings would be able to consume their energy. So Gerald
Da hat man auch die Viecher, die Sachen, die du den Chaos gibst. Echt? Hä? Das gehört zur Lore? Stark.
began thinking of a vessel that would be able to properly handle this kind of power. It's heavily implied that Gerald based a lot of his research on ancient depictions of such a vessel. And this brings us to the Mystic Ruins, the very land that Angel Island, home of the Master Emerald, was split away from. It had ties to an ancient clan of echidnas that fought over the infinite power of the Chaos Emeralds. It was possible that remnants from this extinct clan held some clues for this formula for immortality. Well, it turns out that deep in one of the echidna shrines, Gerald happened upon an enormous mural. This mural depicted a water serpent devouring an ancient city.
Ich sag mal, das Offensichtliche für Sonic-Fans, das ist das, was wir in Sonic Adventure 1 gesehen haben. Da blickt Sonic nämlich auch, das Gebild, wie Chaos eine Stadt zerstört. Quasi in die Zukunft geschaut, was in der Final Story von Sonic Adventure 1 passiert. Habt ihr doch bestimmt alle gesehen, mein Let's Play vor ein paar Wochen, nicht wahr? Nicht wahr?
With carvings of jewels that seemed very similar to the Chaos Emeralds. We know this water serpent as Perfect Chaos from the first Sonic Adventure game. Gerald thought it was possible that such a creature had the ability to harness the power of the Chaos Emeralds, so he began basing several of his prototype experiments after it. The ultimate life form. Someone or something that could never become ill, wither away with age, or die. The experiment started off as pretty straightforward interpretations of this creature from the mural. We can actually see these experimental creatures inhabiting the Ark during the events of Sonic Adventure 2. First, we have the Artificial Chaos P1 variant, which is clearly
Das hat mich halt auch immer irritiert, warum da so Chaos-Gestalten in der Space Colony Ark sind.
modeled after Perfect Chaos from the mural. Its body is entirely made up of water and has an almost identical shape to that of Chaos. And it seems to retain both its shape and sentience from this headpiece found on top. Then there's the Artificial Chaos P100 variant, whose body takes a longer, more spherical shape. It's able to split up into tinier versions of itself, with a helmet acting as the master controller. These experiments were a good step in the right direction, but the issue was that these artificial life forms were just that. Artificial. How could Gerald move forward and apply this same energy to a biological life form? Well, he would take what he learned from these artificial chaos experiments and begin his work on the prototype of the first ultimate life form, the biolizard.
Okay.
Its rate of growth was incredibly fast. It had the ability to regenerate and even self-reproduce. And its organs were capable of utilizing the powers of the Chaos Emeralds. Everything seemed very promising at first, but the scientists quickly realized that the biolizard was very, very flawed. Its limbs proved to be weak. so weak that it didn't even possess the ability to walk. But worst of all, the biolizard's nature grew extremely violent and primitive, and it became too difficult to control at times. As the biolizard continued to grow at an exponential rate, it required an enormous life support system powered by the chaos drives just in order to sustain its own life. Eventually, an entire specialized room was created just to help the biolizard continue living. This room curiously contained an altar for the Master Emerald, likely another result of Gerald's research on the Echidna tribe and Chaos Emeralds. It was most likely supposed to be a way to neutralize the beast's power in the case that it went on a destructive rampage. This was a very dangerous and unpredictable creature that they had on their hands, so the biolizard experiments were eventually abandoned and it was sealed into the specialized room. Word may or may not have leaked out to Gunn about the details of this experiment, including all the potential danger it possessed. After all, complaints from the internal staff about the feasibility of this project and even the safety of their own lives were making their way all around the Ark. But meanwhile, Gerald would take what he learned from the biolizard experiments and begin work on a new ultimate lifeform, hoping to remove the flaws that plagued his prototype. It's here where Gerald must have found some new inspiration, because his idea for his next experiment would take a much different direction. Instead of basing this next ultimate lifeform on some enormous reptilian, he would downsize to something a lot more streamlined. It's heavily implied that Gerald did additional research at this point, this time on Angel Island itself, for more clues on the perfect vessel for the ultimate lifeform. It's highly probable that Gerald found the ancient mural in Hidden Palace Zone, the one from Sonic 3 and Knuckles that foretells the events of Doomsday Zone, depicting the battle between an enormous evil entity and a supercharged Hedgehog. Obviously a foretelling of Dr. Eggman and Supersonic's battle at the end of that game. So Gerald got to work, and eventually the ultimate lifeform was born. Model.
Das ist die Erklärung, warum Shadow aussieht wie ein Igel. Ah gut, aber ist kreativ. Weißt du was, mach mal Canon. Bin gespannt, ob der Kinofilm jetzt wirklich nochmal so in die Richtung was erklären möchte.
After the supercharged hedgehog from the mural. Shadow the Hedgehog, the ultimate lifeform. Shadow was both very similar and dissimilar to the biolizard. First, like his predecessor, he possessed immortality and many of the same chaos control-inducing abilities. But unlike the biolizard, Shadow did not need machinery in order to live. He was perfectly capable of functioning, completing tasks, and making decisions on his own. On top of this, he was incredibly strong, agile, intelligent, and fast. But possibly most importantly, his soul was based off of Maria's. You see, Gerald was still skeptical about the United Federation's true intentions with Project Shadow. In the case something were to go wrong and Shadow would end up being used as a weapon, he had faith that modeling Shadow's soul after Maria would lead Shadow to the correct moral choices in the end. And just like that, Shadow quickly became acquainted with many of the people living on the Ark, including Maria, who he would become very attached to. The two would naturally spend a lot of time together, as Maria's condition kept her pretty rooted to certain rooms. And Shadow had plenty of downtime during his time living on the Ark. They would often have deep philosophical conversations with one another. For instance, Shadow had doubts about his true purpose in life, but Maria was always there to assure him that things would be okay. Their conversations and time spent together meant everything to Shadow, but in many ways, they both felt trapped inside of the Ark and wanted to do their best to help the people back on the surface have a better future. Both Shadow and Maria longed to visit the Earth together, so they made a promise that when Maria was better and Shadow was finished with Gerald's experiments, they one day would. Meanwhile, on Earth, Gunn was getting nervous about the potential dangers and costs of Project Shadow. Word about the dangerous experiments with the biolizard had leaked out to them after all. And not only were they worried about this monstrosity that was created, they were worried about this information finding itself in the hands of the public. Gunn and the United Federation did not want the public to know about these experiments they were conducting up on the Ark, so they made the executive decision to put a stop to Gerald's experiments once and for all. However, it wasn't as simple as asking the team to cease their work. They had to ensure everyone on the Ark would remain silent about Project Shadow, and there was only one way they could guarantee this.
Das ist für mich wirklich ein Plothole. Das ist, dass sie das so machen wollen. Ne? Jetzt geht es darum, die erschießen alle oder die stürmen das. Erst wollen die das finanzieren und dann sagen die so, ach naja, weißt du, eigentlich wollen wir doch nicht. Ne, also das Bestmögliche, wie die es jetzt noch erklären wollen, aber.
The ultimate life form was nearing completion, and just as Gerald was about to put the finishing touches on his life's work, the space colony Ark was invaded by a swarm of gun soldiers. Everyone on board the Ark was to be executed. Everyone except for Gerald and Shadow. Gunn's plan was simple: destroy all evidence of Project Shadow, including anyone that knew of its existence, and falsely blame it on an experiment gone wrong, an accident caused by Gerald Robotnik, all while taking the ultimate life form for themselves. With their plan in motion, Gunn began to slaughter all of the scientists on board the Ark. During the attack, Gerald entrusted and instructed Maria to take Shadow and leave the Ark via an escape pod. They would make their way, but a group of gun soldiers intercepted them, and Maria would end up getting hit by a bullet. Shadow would take out the group of soldiers, and the two desperately limp the rest of their way to the escape pods. Maria, mortally injured, used the last of her strength to activate the escape pod for Shadow, and gave him her final words.
Shadow, I beg of you, please, do it for me. For Maria! Future, for all people who live on that planet, give them a chance to be happy. Let them live for their dreams. Shadow, I know you can do it. That's the reason why you were brought into this world. Sayonara.
Brought into this world, traumatisiert, okay.
Completely traumatized, Shadow was then ejected from the Ark down to Earth, never to see his beloved Maria again. All on the Ark were killed that day, and Gerald was taken into custody and placed on Prison Island. He had gotten word from Gunn that one of the escape pods had ejected. Obviously, this meant that Maria and Shadow had escaped, right? But eventually, he would learn that Maria was one of the names on the list of those who perished on the Ark. And after learning of his granddaughter's death, Gerald would never be the same. Meanwhile, Gunn managed to track down the escape pod and gain possession of Shadow. They would then put him into a state of suspended animation and secure him.
Wie haben die das geschafft? War der irgendwie im Schlafmodus in dieser Kapsel? Oder wenn die den jetzt, die haben ja nicht die komplette Kapsel eingesperrt, oder?
Deep inside of their facilities where he would remain dormant for years. Gerald would then be forced to continue his work on
In den Kinofilmen, im Sonic 2 Film, am Ende der Teaser, das sieht so aus, als wäre das eine Rettungskapsel, wo die es aufmachen und Shadow macht die Augen auf. Da haben sie es ja schon erklärt. Nice.
Project Shadow, this time under much more strict supervision from Gunn. But the idea of losing Maria would strike him with incredible grief, and eventually, Gerald would go insane. During his continued work on Project Shadow, he would scribble formulas on his cell wall. This would be the beginning of his plan to exact revenge on the world for what they took away from him. Even under heavy Gunn supervision, Gerald somehow managed to work under their noses and create a deadly contingency plan, a doomsday program, scripted to cause the space colony Ark to collide and destroy the Earth once all 7 Chaos...
Moment, die haben was Wichtiges rausgelassen. Was ist mit der ganzen Black Doom-Geschichte? Das kommt ja noch. Hallo? Ich hoffe, das wird noch aufgeklärt. Momentchen. Da hat was gefehlt.
Emeralds were placed into the Ark's Eclipse cannon, a weapon attached to the Ark with the original intention to destroy celestial objects posing as a threat to Earth. And now Gerald had modified the Eclipse cannon to be used against the Earth. He then altered Shadow's mind.
Nee, da stimmt was nicht. Da stimmt was nicht. Die Eclipse Cannon ist für den Black Comet von Black Doom. Denn Gerald hat ja mit Black Doom den Deal geschossen für das Blut von Black Doom, um Shadow zu erschaffen. Ich weiß nicht, ob das vielleicht gleich noch hinterher erklärt, aber hier bislang nicht. Hallo?
To carry out this plan to bring all 7 Chaos Emeralds to the Ark upon being reawakened. He even reprogrammed the biolizard as a failsafe to ensure his plan was saw through until the very end. The pieces were now in place, and Gerald's plan to exact revenge on humanity was set out to play out completely on its own. But Gunn would eventually become suspicious and decide to completely stop all work relating to Project Shadow. And rather than having Gerald sit around as a potential danger, the last thing for them to do was to get rid of the one final remnant of these ungodly experiments, the professor himself. Gerald was sentenced to execution by firing squad. and Gunn would finally put an end to Project Shadow. Or so they thought. 50 years later, the events of Sonic Adventure 2 lead to Gerald's plan unfolding exactly how he imagined. Shadow is awakened by Gerald Robotnik's own grandson, Dr. Eggman, who controls Shadow by using his malice towards humans. Together, they manage to collect and place all 7 Chaos Emeralds into the Eclipse cannon, and the arc begins its collision towards Earth just as Gerald had set up. However, one thing Gerald didn't account for was Shadow's soul. Remember, it was modeled after Maria, and in the end, Shadow remembers his promise to her, to give humanity a chance. The Earth that they both long to visit together. Rather than destroy it, Shadow chooses to protect it, because it's what Maria would have wanted. With the arc only mere seconds away from colliding with the Earth, Shadow uses the last of his energy to warp the arc via Chaos Control off of its collision course, but doing so would consume the remainder of his energy. In the end, Shadow would sacrifice himself to protect humanity, keeping his promise to the one person who meant everything to him. For a while, Shadow was thought to be dead. The heroic sacrifice seemed to be his final act, an impactful conclusion to the saga that started aboard the Space Colony arc. But this story isn't over. This has only been the events told strictly from the perspective of Sonic Adventure 2's narrative. This is not the end of the Project Shadow storyline, because its lore would be expanded on in subsequent titles, adding in additional details and continuing the narrative.
Du hast aber schon eine Erweiterung dazu gepackt. Alleine, dass Maria Nitz hat. Ich glaube, in Sonic Adventure 2 gab es diese Erklärung noch nicht. Dass sie Nitz hat, wurde erst in Shadow the Hedgehog eingeführt, erweitert. Ja? Deswegen dachte ich, der packt schon die ganze Story aus. Aber scheinbar nicht.
Shadow would mysteriously reappear in Sonic Heroes, seemingly having survived the ordeal with the final hazard. This raised many questions. Did Shadow somehow truly and miraculously survive? Is he merely a clone of the original, an android? What exactly is Shadow the Hedgehog? These uncertainties would become central to his character arc moving forward. Unfortunately, Sonic Heroes never answers these questions completely. But don't worry, because all of this and more will be answered as we uncover the remaining details about Project Shadow. So if you remember, Gerald spent a ton of time
Sonic Heroes, es gibt noch was Wichtiges, das hat er jetzt nicht so eindeutig erklärt. In Sonic Heroes finden die immer wieder Shadow-Androiden, also Roboter, sodass der Shadow, den man steuert, halt auch denkt, bin ich nur ein Android, ist vielleicht der damals auf der Space Colony Arc dabei war, nur das Original gewesen und ich bin eine Kopie, das wurde nicht abschließend geklärt, richtig. Aber es wurde auch nicht gesagt, dass Shadow Erinnerungslücken, oder? Vielleicht habe ich nicht aufgepasst. Aber er hat Erinnerungslücken, er weiß ja gar nicht. Er versucht es ja selbst rauszufinden.
researching different vessels capable of harnessing the power of the Chaos Emeralds to achieve immortality. That was the entire goal of Project Shadow. You might also remember that there were murals of the Water Serpent and the superpowered Hedgehog that Gerald uncovered and based the biolizard and Shadow off of respectively. But what if I told you that there was another thing that Gerald uncovered during this research period that would lead to significant events unfolding much later on in the future? But before we talk about these events, we need to go back in time for some context. 4,000 years ago, to be exact. We all know about the ancient Knuckles clan from Sonic Adventure 1. I explained how they resided in the Mystic Ruins and were responsible for the mural of the Water Serpent, aka Perfect Chaos. Well, in ancient times, they actually had a rival clan called the Nocturnus clan. The Nocturnus clan.
Wow, der nimmt Sonic Chronicles mit. Das RPG für den DS. Aber was hat das mit Shadow zu tun?
Clan were rapidly overtaking land, and eventually they'd run into the Knuckles clan, who were out there basically doing the exact same thing. However, this tribe of echidnas were much more technologically advanced than the Knuckles clan, and the two groups clashed with one another for power. The more technologically advanced clan would have the upper hand though, since they had the power of gizoids on their side. The gizoids were ancient androids geared towards combat with the ability to rapidly learn and mimic the abilities of their opponents. And with an entire army of gizoids at their side, the Nocturnus clan was able to mostly overtake the Knuckles clan. Desperate for more power, the Knuckles clan turned towards the Chaos Emeralds. But in their destructive struggle for this power, they awakened Chaos, who laid waste to essentially their entire clan. The Nocturnus clan had no
Ne, also dafür hat er in Sonic Adventure 1 seine eigene Tochter Tikal überrannt und Chaos entzürnt, aber der Zusammenhang ist mir jetzt ein bisschen unklar.
Competition at this point, and would go on to conquer almost all of the planet. Almost. You see, the overwhelming advantage that the Gizoids gave the Nocturnus clan led them to devoting a lot of time and effort into researching them further, and this led to the creation of the most powerful Gizoid of all time, Emerl.
Emerl.
Emerl was created with
Ich sag immer Emerl. Warte, das war der aus Sonic Battle. Der wird übrigens auch in Sonic X thematisiert, nach der Sonic Adventure 2 Lore. Das ist interessant.
The ability to harness the power of the Chaos Emeralds, and would go on to absorb all information on every form of combat and weaponry of its era. Needless to say, this Gizoid was incredibly strong. So strong that it caught the attention of a literal god and it was forced to intervene, sealing away the entire Nocturnus clan and every single Gizoid to another dimension for all of eternity. Well, every Gizoid, but one. Somehow, Emerl would manage to remain, although sealed away inside of ancient ruins for thousands of years. Now, back to the events of Project Shadow. Allegedly, during the research for creating the ultimate lifeform, the lone Gizoid was uncovered from inside of these ancient ruins and soon found itself in the hands of Gerald Robotnik. The android would be activated completely by accident one day while Gerald was studying the Chaos Emeralds within a close vicinity to it. This would make it apparent that the android was built to harness the power of the Chaos Emeralds, a perfect learning opportunity to be used for Project Shadow. But the professor would also notice that it would mimic all of his movements. And after extensive research, Gerald would soon realize the full extent of its abilities. The professor eventually surmised the history of the Gizoids, and after realizing the danger it possessed, attempted to form an allegiance with it to keep its power under control. The Gizoids are programmed to form an allegiance or link with anyone who displays incredible power. So after feeding it information of some of the modern weaponry of his era, the professor was able to successfully form a link with Emerl. And from then on, Emerl would listen to Gerald and Gerald only. The professor was able to learn a lot from Emerl, which greatly aided.
Dieser Zusammenhang zwischen Gerald und Emerl, den kenne ich nicht. Wo nimmt er das her? Sonic Battle, wo Emerl auftaucht? Sonic X? Nein.
The advancement of Project Shadow. However, as we know, the attempts at making the ultimate lifeform took much time and yielded many unwanted results. The United Federation was getting impatient and threatened to put a hold on the research. So in order to buy more time, Gerald offered Emerl to them as a sort of bribe. After all, the fate of his granddaughter was riding on the success of these experiments. But Gerald was worried about the United Federation using the Gizoid for a malicious intent. So before handing it over, he instructed it to cease absorbing any more new combat information. With the Gizoid now in the hands of the United Federation, Gerald was allowed to continue his work on Project Shadow for a little bit longer. And Emerl, just as Gerald instructed, would refuse to listen to the United Federation and deny the absorption of any new combat information. They tried many things in order to override the link it had formed with Gerald, but nothing seemed to work. That is, until they equipped Emerl with a Chaos Emerald. Emerald's allegiance shifted towards the United Federation, who possessed the greater power, the Chaos Emerald, and they would finally be able to perform their experiments. All was going according to plan, but after absorbing an extensive amount of information on modern weaponry and technology, something in Emerl snapped and it would lose control, setting out on a destructive rampage and decimating a large portion of the space colony Ark before finally being subdued. Gerald already knew of the Gizoid's destructive power from his research, and now the United Federation had learned of it as well, the hard way. With the United Federation not wanting anything to do with it after the incident, Emerl would find itself in the hands of Gerald once again. Gerald was to destroy the Gizoid in order to prevent anything like this ever happening again. But after many failed attempts, it was obvious that destroying it was not an option. Instead, Gerald turned towards reprogramming its AI. From this, the professor was able to give Emerl free will and emotions, and eventually insert a sort of digital soul based off of his own beloved granddaughter, Maria. With this new AI, Emerl's threat was greatly reduced. And as an added bonus, Gerald figured out a way to erase its destructive programming, but only after absorbing all 7 Chaos Emeralds and then using a simple key phrase.
Es hört sich an, als höre ich mir eine Fanfiction an und die auch noch nix zu tun hat mit Shadow. Also, wo kommt das her?
bring hope to humanity. These were the last words spoken by Maria before she died aboard the Ark. This implies that Gerald was forced to reprogram Emerl during his time in Prison Island, after the attack on the Ark. Anyways, after this final alteration by Gerald, Emerl would be sealed away. That is, coincidentally, until Geralds own...
Als ob der in Gefangenschaft, wo du den gesehen hast, in Ketten, in dicken Ketten, den Emerl nochmal neu programmieren konnte in seiner Zelle. Das klingt echt nach Quatsch.
Grandson, Dr. Eggman, would uncover him once again 50 years later.
Das ist Sonic
However,
Battle.
Frustrated by Emerl refusing to listen to him, the Doctor tosses the seemingly useless android away on Emerald Beach, where he's soon discovered by Sonic and friends. The group is quick to befriend him, taking turns mentoring the android, and it would go on to learn the value of things like friendship. Emerl quickly gains more and more sentience, picking up on unique traits and quirks from each character who befriends it. But out of everyone, Shadow was possibly the one able to relate to Emerl the most. After all, their souls were modeled after the same person.
Being at least partially a product of Gerald's creation, the two contemplated why they were given souls in the first place.
Were they weapons for war? Tools to maintain peace? In the end, it was up to them to discover the answer to these questions. And so Emerald and Shadow would gather all 7 emeralds and speak the key phrase, "Bring hope to humanity," which granted Emerl complete freedom from his destructive programming that would sometimes kick in. Emerl was finally free, or so they thought. Emerl would be sent to put a stop to another one of Dr. Eggman's schemes, but Eggman tricks Emerl into witnessing an incredible display of power. It's here where Eggman shoots an enormous laser out into space, completely obliterating a group of stars. With a display of power so immense, it causes Emerl's innate destructive programming to take over, and it goes on a rampage, hijacking Eggman's laser and aiming it directly at Earth. It seemed that Gerald's failsafe was a complete bust.
Not even his scientific genius could tame the wild power of the gizoid.
Left with no choice, Sonic is tragically forced to defeat Emerl in battle, gravely wounding him. But Maria's soul comes through right at the very end, and Emerl regains control over itself to say its final goodbyes to the wonderful friends it made along the way before vanishing forever. The story of Gerald and Emerl is a tragic tale that fits retroactively into the existing lore of Project Shadow. However, there's still more to this story, and it's here where things take an unexpected twist.
Also von mir aus wurde er halt beeinflusst von Gerald, okay, aber das war die Geschichte von Sonic Battle und hä?
This is the story of the Black Arms, an evil alien race who secretly had a large helping hand in the development
Das
of
hier
Project
gehört mehr
Shadow.
dazu.
The Black Arms reside on the Black Comet, a celestial body that passes Earth once every 50 years. Commanded by their supreme leader, Black Doom, their ultimate goal is to punish humanity for their history of horrendous transgressions by taking over their planet and using them as sustenance. Some of the earliest history of the Black Arms can be traced back at least 2,000 years ago, right on Earth, where they created a stronghold in the Glyphic Canyons. This stronghold, also known as the Holy Ground, is capable of becoming airborne and firing powerful laser beams. The Black Arms created the stronghold for future use, when the time was finally right for them to invade
schwarzen
Earth.
Arme.
So previously, I mentioned how Shadow the Hedgehog was eventually created using what Gerald had learned from the biolizard experiments, and then modeled after the depiction of Supersonic from the murals in Hidden Palace Zone. But in actuality, at least according to the game Shadow the Hedgehog, there's a whole lot more that happened in order to create the ultimate life form that we were never told about. You see, Gerald didn't just create Shadow with his own scientific genius all by himself like we originally thought he did. The professor had some help. Actually, even the biolizard had a little bit of help from behind the scenes. Around the same time Gerald was planning out the creation of the biolizard, the Black Comet, which again passes Earth every 50 years, happened to be in the middle of its rounds. Completely stumped on how to make any progress with Project Shadow, Gerald made contact with the Black Arms and requested their assistance. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? The professor explained the troublesome situation that Project Shadow was in.
Das ist halt komplett. Oh, da kommt ja ein Komet, ne? Fragen wir mal die Außerirdischen, ob die vielleicht irgendwas wissen. Die Cutscene kenne ich auch. Da steht da der Gerald mit dem Black Doom. Guck doch mal an hier. Hast du eine Idee? Stecker ziehen, wieder reinstecken vielleicht?
And Black Doom agreed to assist Gerald with creating the ultimate life form, even providing his own DNA, which would help grant it certain attributes like immortality and the ability to use chaos control. This was exactly what the professor was looking for. However, there was one condition to this deal. During the next passing of the Black Comet, 50 years later, Gerald would have the ultimate lifeform assist the Black Arms in gathering the 7 Chaos Emeralds. What exactly did they plan to do with these emeralds? Well, they didn't exactly specify. Now, if you're thinking this sounds kind of iffy already, you're goddamn right. But being extremely desperate for results, Gerald was completely willing to accept this deal. Obviously, the Black Arms were up to no good, so the professor devised a plan to secretly thwart whatever they were trying to do 50 years in the future.
Eclipse Cannon.
Remember the Eclipse Cannon? I previously mentioned how it was built with the purpose of destroying celestial objects.
Ja, also das wurde zwar nicht erklärt in Sonic Adventure 2 und das wurde erst für das Shadow-Spiel ausgedacht, aber hier in dem Video dachte ich, wird es so chronologisch erklärt, wisst ihr?
Posing as a threat to Earth, but little did we know at the time, it was built with a very specific celestial object in mind, the Black Comet. Gerald had no intention to keep...
Ist aber auch ein Arschmove, oder? Du machst einen Deal mit dem, du sagst, ja, ist in Ordnung, aber machst trotzdem schon mal eine Kanone, um den trotzdem zu zerstören, wenn es schief geht.
His end of the bargain. The professor built the Eclipse Cannon with the intention of completely betraying the Black Arms and obliterating their comet with the laser before they could even pay Earth a visit 50 years later. However, as we know, Gerald's plans were cut short when the Ark was raided and he was incarcerated on Prison Island. And with his utter disdain for everyone and everything at that point after what they did to his beloved Maria, there'd be no reason for him to warn anyone about the inevitable threat arriving 50 years down the line. If anything, the Black Arms invading and completely obliterating the Earth would be the perfect plan B in case his original Doomsday program didn't work out. And if his Doomsday program did work, he'd totally be screwing over the Black Arms at the same time. No Earth equals no Chaos Emeralds. So either way, Gerald would be winning. Of course, we all know that Gerald's plan to destroy the Earth fails because of the heroic actions of Sonic and Shadow at the end of Sonic Adventure 2. But now, the Black Arms are set to arrive to Earth without any warning. In exactly 50 years after the pact between Professor Gerald Robotnik and Black Doom being made, the Black Arms arrive to Earth and immediately begin their rampage, starting with a full-scale attack on the city of Westopolis. Shadow, who's nearby and happens to see this all unfold, is immediately approached by Black Doom, commanding him to collect all 7 Chaos Emeralds as per their promise. Obviously, Shadow has no idea what this creature is or what he's talking about, and throughout the game, it's completely up to the player to choose who to take orders from. Black Doom, Sonic and Friends, Eggman, or Shadow can even forge his own path. And especially with Shadow being so confused about his own identity during the course of this game, it's the perfect reasoning for him to be just as likely to pick any of these options. But no matter what choices you make during the course of this game, there's a few crucial plot details to Project Shadow that we learn within the various possible paths. Immediately following the attack on Westopolis, the commander of Gun himself accuses Shadow of siding with the aliens,
Ja, der war ein Kinderfreund, ein Schulfreund von Maria, also alles so wild.
regardless of the player's actual choice. You see, the commander of Gun has a grudge against the ultimate lifeform. As a child, he lived aboard the Ark with his parents, who worked there as scientists. He was also good friends with Maria, and they'd often play together while the grown-ups were hard at work. One day, after playing around the Ark with Maria, he stumbles upon the moment.
Er hat da schon graue Haare gehabt und 2 verschiedene Augenfarben wie eine Anime-Figur. Also das Shadow-Spiel, ne? Also, es ist so wild, ne?
Of Shadow's creation, the forging of the pact between Gerald and Black Doom. This was already a traumatizing event for the poor boy, but not long after, the Ark would be invaded by...
Filmreife Animats 2005, meine Freunde, das war 2005!
This was already a traumatizing event for the poor boy, but not long after, the Ark would be invaded by Gun, killing his entire family and his best friend Maria in
Never turn back. Die Musik im Hintergrund.
order to keep the entire project a secret. Why was he spared while Maria was killed? Maybe it was because she was trying to escape with the ultimate lifeform. Maybe it was because he was slightly younger and Gun actually took mercy on him. But either way, assuming the young boy knew nothing, Gun took him under their guardianship, leading him towards a path in life that eventually resulted in him becoming the head commander of Gun. And since that fateful day, the commander blamed Shadow for the death of his loved ones and swore to get his revenge. The commander does eventually confront Shadow one-on-one, and after a brief battle, he realizes that Shadow truly doesn't remember anything from his past, making it difficult to sustain his rage against the Hedgehog. Because for the first time, he begins to relate to Shadow. They both lost everything on the Ark that day. Maybe him and Shadow weren't so different. We'll get back to the Gun commander in a bit, but let's now talk about Shadow's identity. Depending on which routes you take, you'll get an assortment of different answers. The original Ultimate Lifeform, an android, a pawn of Black Doom, the protector of the space colony Ark, But what is the canonical answer? Who is Shadow the Hedgehog? Luckily, the true ending of the game shows us what
Moment, es gibt Endings, die sagen, du bist ein Android? Cryronic, schreib mal, wie das so ist.
actually happens. Shadow manages to collect all 7 Chaos Emeralds. For whom did he collect them for? Well, it's actually ambiguous because of the open-endedness of the entire game. But either way, Black Doom steals them and uses their power to teleport the Black Comet down to Earth. The Black Comet, reacting to the Earth's atmosphere, then produces a gas enveloping the entire planet. This gas, which the Black Arms are naturally immune to, causes complete paralysis of the body, making it extremely easy for all living things to be devoured alive by the bloodthirsty alien race. But because Shadow was created with Black
Auch so affig, wie die da einfach festgefroren sind.
Doom's DNA,
Wie die auch 2005 einfach wieder die Charaktermodelle aus Sonic Adventure 2 vom Dreamcast genommen haben, ne?
too turns out to be immune to this gas. Shadow uses this as an opportunity to pursue Black Doom, and it's here where he learns the shocking revelation, that he was created with Black Doom's own blood. He too is technically part of the Black Arms hive mind. With the horror of this realization, Shadow succumbs to Black Doom's control. That is, until Team Chaotix managed to activate a pre-recorded message from none other than Gerald Robotnik. This message, containing the truth, is broadcasted across the entire world just as last time. The truth about the Ark, about the Black Arms' involvement in Project Shadow, about the government's foul play, but most importantly, about the Eclipse Cannon and its intended use against the Black Comet. The Gun Commander, also viewing this broadcast, finally learns the truth about Project Shadow for himself. Gun, the very organization that he ended up devoting his life to, was the one that killed everyone aboard the Ark on that fateful day in a horrible act of corruption. And Shadow and Gerald, they were simply the scapegoats. It seemed that he was truly wrong about Shadow the Hedgehog this entire time. It turns out, Shadow is actually humanity's last hope. And with this, Shadow regains his footing, breaking free of Black Doom's control, causing Black Doom to flee and leave the Chaos Emeralds behind. And with all 7 Chaos Emeralds in his possession, Shadow is able to use them to activate his super form once again. Black Doom then reveals his true form, Devil Doom, and the two face off in a gargantuan one-on-one battle. Mustering up all of his strength, Shadow battles the very being that created him. During this battle,
Dr. Eggman tells him the truth. Nur wenn man genau hinhört, hört man ein wichtiges Detail.
Eggman confirms that Shadow is not an android or a clone, but the original that we've come to know from Sonic Adventure 2.
Shadow, can you hear me? This might be the last chance I have to speak to you, so everyone thought you died during that horrible incident. But I rescued you with one of my robots. You lost your memory, that's all. You really are the ultimate life form my grandfather created.
With Shadow finally fully understanding his true purpose and who he really is, he defeats Devil Doom, uses Chaos Control to move the Black Comet directly in front of the Space Colony Ark, and fires the Eclipse Cannon point blank into it. This obliterates the comet, and with it, the entire Black Arm species to extinction. Shadow, with the reassurance of Gerald, was once again able to fulfill his promise to Maria, to bring hope to humanity. And that was the complete lore of Project Shadow. This was a compilation / remaster of my original 2 Project Shadow videos. So if you liked it, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for even more way past cool Sonic content like this. Huge thank you to my amazing channel members, and with all that being said, I hope everyone has a fantastic day. Peace.
So, und jetzt muss ich wirklich sagen, die Sache mit Emerl hier in der Mitte komplett überflüssig. Kannst du komplett rauslassen. So, da gibt es ein bisschen Zusammenhang, ne? Anscheinend wurde er beeinflusst, wurde er gebaut von der anderen Knuckles-Clan, okay, aus Sonic Chronicles. Dann hat irgendwie der Gerald die Seele von Maria damit reingebracht und Shadow denkt sich so, WTF, Main. Aber das hatte nichts mit Shadow zu tun, das kannst du rauslassen, Mann. Da labert der mich wirklich hier 8 Minuten damit voll mit, also, ne, wisst ihr, wie ich meine? So, und das hier, das ist komplett wild, das Shadow-Spiel, dass die da Sonic Adventure 2 so erweitert haben. Ne, dass sie am Ende sagen, die Eclipse Cannon ist eigentlich dafür gemacht worden, um den Black Comet zu zerstören, ist noch das Coolste und Sinnigste an der Story. Deswegen, Ich hoffe, die nehmen nicht allzu viel von dem Shadow-Spiel, aber ich glaube es nicht. Die werden sich bei einem Kinofilm mehr um die Sonic Adventure 2 Saga kümmern. Ja, den Black Doom und die alle, die brauchst du nicht einsammeln. Ja. Yeah. Alles klar, das wär's soweit. Habt ihr was Neues gelernt? Wahrscheinlich viel zu viel. Sachen, die gar nicht so wichtig waren. Was macht ein Chaomix noch? Da gucke ich gleich mal vorbei, ob es ein Abo wert ist. Entschuldigung. Schluck auf, weiß nicht warum. Aber auf jeden Fall. Keanu will do justice to Shadow in Sonic 3. Ja, das mache ich alles fertig.
Growing up.
...2010er YouTube Destroyed Sonic. Entschuldigung mal bitte. Das hier war's. Das Thumbnail ist aber nicht so krass. Er hat schon einige Videos, das ist interessant. Würdest du wirklich in City Escape leben wollen? Nee. Tatsächlich nicht. Ja, aber kostet ja nichts, ne? Kostet ja nichts. Abo geht raus und vielleicht auch ihr. Also, was haltet ihr von der kompletten Shadow-Lore? Was geht zu weit? Was ist Banane? Und wir sehen uns das nächste Mal wieder. Danke für eure Aufmerksamkeit und das war mein Senf dazu. Bis zum nächsten Mal. Gute.